So thank you very much again for this opportunity to talk with you about our topic of this virtual paper development workshop, African Approaches to Tackle Grand Challenges. And you doing research also on mainly on biodiversity conservation. I'm just wondering at the beginning, how did you end up doing research on such a topic that also contributes to tackle grand challenges?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on your conference. You know, the idea of working on biodiversity just came by sheer accident, because I'm an organic chemist by training, and I have always been fascinated by chemistry as a as a subject. And when I came back from my studies in the UK, where I was doing synthetic organic chemistry, organic molecules, because at the end of the day, organic chemistry is all about the chemistry of carbon. So I still wanted to follow on that theme, but I could not do synthetic organic chemistry as I was used to. So this is when I went into an analytical chemistry. That is, you isolate and then you characterize. And what best way to actually look at chemistry from the perspective of unique plants that we have in the Indian Ocean, because we mustn't forget that Mauritius belongs to the archipelago of the Mascarene, and we are one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world. So I thought to myself that it would be a great idea to probe this biodiversity so that we can isolate new molecules. And who says new molecules mean adding to the body of knowledge, because at the end of the day, the finality of any academic is to publish, because the mantra goes that if you don't publish, you perish. So I started looking into this. I started isolating molecules, but you know, after interviewing many people, especially older ladies who were actually sharing their knowledge on herbal medicine with me, I quickly realized that it was rather a sterile approach to just focus on isolation and characterization, but to look at the bigger picture. Because what constitutes medicinal plants, what constitutes their efficacy, is that, as a chemist, I see from the chemist perspective, is that you have marker molecules, you have active molecules, and these molecules actually determine whether the plant is active or not. So this is when I took the scientific approach of adding a scientific framework around these herbal knowledge. And so the journey started. I prepared the entire biodiversity database, and at least on medicinal plants, and the journey started.
Okay, thank you. So it's interesting to see how from different fields, there are always hurdles, but as a scholar, you try to overcome them, and then new doors open. So that's quite interesting.
Yes, indeed.
Regarding the topic of the workshop, what do you believe are today's grand challenges faced by African countries?
Yes, you know, I will posit my answer within the framework of African post-independence history, because African countries have started getting independence since for the past 60 odd years. And I think it is within this framework that we really have to look at the opportunities, but also the challenges of the continent, and also many African countries there. Before, African institutions, they were focused on dispensing training on administration and social studies, and all of these issues mattered then because they were actually, of course, being ruled by the colonial powers. Now that Africa is going towards the journey of self-determination, they have to build institutions. And I think this is where the challenges lie, because African countries have now to dispense courses in science, technology, innovative practices, create the ecosystem where scientists and entrepreneurs can operate in. And it is within this framework that we have to view the challenges of the African continent, because the countries have to run before they can actually walk. So institution building, training of the human capital, preparing the ecosystem that will retain entrepreneurs, so we see less young people dying in the Mediterranean, and also focusing on the SDGs, because what are the SDGs? They are the promises made within the framework of the Declaration of Human Rights, of course, delayed by over 75 years. And it's only now that, the world is waking up to this promise. And Africa has now to look at delivering on these SDGs with existing institutions which are not prepared to do so. And yet we know that prosperity will be at the nexus of human capital, investment in the institution, and also adding value to the existing resources. When I talk about resources, I'm not only talking about the minerals, I'm also talking about a sector like agriculture, for example, which stands to gain quite a bit if we start really investing, if we start really empowering the people with the tools of technology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You actually raising already some questions that I have listed here. So I continue, and another question that I have, what do you believe then is then the advantage of bringing an African perspective into creating knowledge for tackling grand challenges?
By 2050, it has been estimated that 1 in 4 persons living on this planet will be African. So if we are going to look at it from the prism of the potential of the African human capital, I think we have to take on board the African perspective. And I have explained this before, that already we need to look at the chapeau. We need to look at multilateral institutions, for example. We need to create, for example, a G21, because we cannot keep on ignoring 1.4 billion people on this planet. And their needs, their aspirations, and their challenges have to be addressed at that level. But it only gets addressed when there is representation. And right now, Africa is not being represented. The second point that we have also to posit is that we are witnessing a renaissance in Africa. We are witnessing the desire to be proud to be African. And I think that's also very, very important, because it's only when we start being inclusive that we take the African perspective. We respect the culture, we respect the tradition. And here, I mean respect in the widest sense of the word, because when I started working on herbal knowledge, it was not respected, because whenever you talk about African tradition, people will always refer to this as quackery. They will refer to it as witchcraft, and kind of really reducing it to a level which is not considered to be respect. So we have to start being inclusive when it comes to Africa, and we also have to recognize that African continent is not a continent that has, for example, contributed to greenhouse gas emission and yet going to be impacted. But whomsoever will look at the future of the world will have to increasingly see Africa as one of, I'm not going to say just breadbasket, but one of the continents that can make massive input, provided we give her the right tools, provided we are inclusive, and also provided we explore her mineral resources correctly. So these are some of the challenges that the world will face, but more importantly, how do we address the human capital? That's more important.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Now, I'm wondering, as you being a natural scientist, what do you believe can social scientists, such as management scholars, public management scholars participating in this workshop, what can they contribute to this debate? What do you believe, also based on your background as a politician and so on?
As I said, I use the word inclusion. Inclusion, of course, is really, really wide-ranging. And in fact, people always say that the world will be transformed through STEM, S-T-E-M, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But I always say that the world will be transformed by the inclusion of the STEAM, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics. And we can also put another M, which is management. So I think we have to go towards a much more inclusive approach to solving a lot of the problem, because when you talk about management tools, when you talk about management perspective, I mean, management perspective is shaped by culture, is shaped by history. So all this will bring on board a new paradigm to the management, not just of Africa, but of course the whole world. Because if you look at regions of the world, be it Asia, Africa, or Latin America, they all come in with a different perspective. And so the art, the management, the social perspective will certainly help to increase inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm also thinking about what you've just said about institution building. I mean, that's kind of a key topic in social science. Yeah. You raised a topic about human capital, building of human capital. What do you believe can be done or continue to be done to promote research to advance African perspectives?
I think when we talk about the human capital, I think there is something that had been missing in the equation, is the need for investment. Because when we look at the human capital, we are talking about investment in that human capital, not an expense. And that's one thing my country has recognized at the very early age, is at the very early stage of our emancipation, at our self-determination, is the investment into into education. It became free in 1976. And to me, that has been a huge game changer. Unfortunately, the narrative across many poorer countries is that this will be done by someone else, or the money will come from somewhere else. But if you look at the countries that have made it economically and that were at par with many countries in Africa, I'll take an example. South Korea, for example, that emerged of the Korean War in the 1950s. When they started, when of course the war ended, they were looking for that magic formula. Many South Koreans went to Africa. They were studying the 5-year plan, because at that point there was story of the 5-year plan. They were looking at development has been happening elsewhere, just to get a grasp of how to proceed with their own fate after the war. And that country started with education. They started every 10 years. They added one layer of education, starting with the pre-primary, primary, secondary. And by the time it came to the tertiary, I mean, through institution building, through investment in institution, and the appropriate level of funding, we saw that country. Again, I have to highlight the fact that South Korea doesn't have many mineral resources either. And so they proceeded and they became a giant. And how did they become a giant? It is precisely through investment of institution, through investment in research, and also through making choices, because they knew that they could not do everything, but they chose the electronic industry, and we now have a giant. And of course, the per capita that South Korea was in the 1950s was parallel to that of an African country. And now to see where they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. So I come to my final question, and what do you believe in 10 years from today? How do you think African research will look like?
You know, there's a lot of research happening on the continent, and plenty of research that can have really impactful effect on many countries where that research is happening. But unfortunately, what is lacking is the investment that will take the research finding across the valley of death to be actually been translated into enterprise. Again, at a smaller scale, I try to do that because I took my research finding and tried to make it into an enterprise. But I think this is where government are getting rather concerned, and also some are actually taking the bull by the horn and investing in that space. But increasingly, we saw that in Americas, we see that in some countries in Asia. We need to encourage the culture of giving, the culture of philanthropy. Because I always use this example. If Zuckerberg did not get this philanthropist to give him the $100,000 to register his company in Palo Alto, we would be seeing maybe a different world altogether, or a world which would not be called Facebook, because there would have been other actors in that space. But I think the culture of philanthropy has to be cultivated, the culture of giving, the culture of investing, and also government, because at the end of the day, all research, if you look at the United States, the best research about the technology we are using right now is the product of the military research. So we need government, we need investment, and also we need the private sector to play their part in development. So there has to be this the very famous triple helix of investment by government, private sector, and of course, involvement of the civil society.
Definitely agree. Thank you very much. Gone through my questions. So wish you still a nice day, and thank you again for your time.